Hi, welcome back to An Inspector Calls Act 2. This is part 3. So this was the last slide that we finished on. And we move on to this slide here where the red represents Mrs Birling, who has just entered this scene. And I think what's important is to note in the stage directions, look at those two adverbs there about her attitude. She's quite brisk, she's self-confident. There's that arrogance. I'm above everybody else, I am self-important, which is the attitude that Priestley disliked and wants to really show up. He really wants to show up Mr. and Mrs. Birling in this play, and to knock her off that pedestal, really. And those two adverbs are quite important in that description of her, of how she starts to how she ends up being presented throughout the play. And we get that arrogance in the line when Mrs. Birling says, "I'm Mrs. Birling, you know," as if you should know who I am, my reputation and my social class are important. I've indicated a couple of things in bold here that I think are quite important to recognise, and also they're hints about the characters as well. So Mrs. Birling refers to Sheila as child. We get that quite often. Mrs. Birling talks about her two grown-up children, they're in their 20s, as still children, almost as if she doesn't recognise or is oblivious to their growing up. She's not been involved. It suggests that she's quite out of touch with being a mother and has not really taken on that role as a middle-class woman. And the inspector's response there is really some foreshadowing on the end of the play, but also a hope, I think. He says we often do on the young ones have a good are impressionable. So there's a hope there that the next generation, Sheila and Eric, can make a change, can listen and learn and take responsibility, so that society can change and improve. Mrs. Birling's prejudice comes out in this one here when she talks of girls of that class. And there's that grouping together. She doesn't see working class women as separate. She talks about them as a group, that stereotype that middle class people believed, that working class people deserved to be there. They were more stupid, more ridiculous, criminals. There was all those awful stereotypes. And Mrs. Birling clearly puts Eva Smith within that. Sheila, all the way through this, and I've not picked up on every single one, but you'll spot this, she is very aware of what's going on, and she's constantly telling her mother, "You're being ridiculous, don't build up these walls, you don't know what you're doing." Sheila's very much in the know, she's clued in, so she's already turning onto the side of the inspector there. She has had that impression, that impact on her that the inspector wanted. Mrs. Birling, in this section here, in the red, she uses impertinent quite often. Now, impertinent means to be quite rude. And the reason I've highlighted this is because she says this word constantly. And she's going around saying, "You're being rude." She doesn't like people being rude to her. She clearly believes that she should be respected. She should be treated well because of her social class, and that deserves the right for her to be for her to be superior to everybody else. And she tries to play that to the inspector. Unfortunately, it doesn't work. But you can see here that she talks rather grandly. There's that I'm superior to you, Inspector. And she even does what her husband does and tries to use reputation. Of course, my husband was Lord Mayor only 2 years ago. So again, she's really trying to use her status to make other people feel bad and feel inferior.